I found out in less than 6 hours that everything I believed about my future was a lie. A single phone call, an overheard conversation, and 18 years of promises evaporated like morning mist. I stood frozen in my childhood bedroom, my acceptance letter to Stanford still clutched in my trembling hand, as the words from downstairs carved themselves into my memory. She doesn't need to know where the money went. Jason needed it more than she ever will. The late afternoon sun filtered through my bedroom window, casting long shadows across the walls covered with academic awards and honor society certificates. My entire life had been building toward this moment, the culmination of years of straight A's, volunteer work, and sacrificed weekends. Stanford had been the dream, and against all odds, they wanted me. The acceptance package had arrived that morning, and my parents had smiled and hugged me, promising we'd discuss the finances over dinner. "We've been saving for this day since you were born, sweetheart," my father had said, his hand on my shoulder. The Matthews College Fund will finally serve its purpose. The Matthews College Fund. For as long as I could remember, it had been referenced at family gatherings, mentioned during financial discussions, and held up as the reason I should aim high. "Don't worry about the cost," they'd said. "Just get in, and we'll handle the rest." I had never seen the statements, but my parents had assured me that by the time I graduated high school, there would be enough to cover 4 years at a top university. It was the safety net that allowed me to dream beyond the modest means of our middle-class household. Now, standing at the top of the stairs, I realized it had all been smoke and mirrors. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I'd come downstairs to ask about dinner plans, but the heated conversation from my father's study had stopped me cold. "Margaret, what was I supposed to do?" My father's voice carried through the partially open door. "Jason's business was going under. That 50,000 was just sitting there." "I know, Robert, but we promised her. She's worked so hard for this." My mother's voice was tight with anxiety. "Jason has worked hard too. His landscaping business just needed a cash infusion to get through the slow season. Besides, he's family. He'll pay it back. And if he doesn't? What do we tell Eliza? Stanford isn't community college. Even with scholarships, we're looking at 30,000 a year." There was a long pause before my father spoke again. "She's smart. She'll get more scholarships. Or she can go to state like Jason did. The important thing is that she doesn't find out about the money. As far as Eliza knows, the market took a downturn, and we lost some of the investment. She doesn't need to know where the money went. Jason needed it more than she ever will." I felt my chest constrict as though all the air had been sucked from the hallway. My brother Jason, 5 years my senior, had never excelled academically. While I devoted myself to books and extracurriculars, he'd coasted through high school with CS and DS before barely graduating from state with a business degree. His landscaping company, started 2 years ago, had been struggling from the beginning. And now my future had been sacrificed for his failing business. I stood paralyzed, my mind racing through calculations. $50,000. Gone. The fund that was supposed to see me through 4 years of my dream school emptied to bail out my brothers per business decisions. The same brother who had always called me teacher's pet and the golden child, despite being the one who received our parents' unconditional support regardless of his choices. The sound of a chair scraping across hardwood jolted me back to reality. I retreated up the stairs, closing my bedroom door silently behind me just as my father's study door opened. Now, sitting on the edge of my bed, I stared at the acceptance package spread across my comforter. The glossy brochures showcasing Stanford's palm-lined paths and red-roofed buildings seemed to mock me. My cell phone buzzed with texts from friends asking if I'd heard back yet, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I tell them I'd been accepted to one of the best universities in the country, only to discover that the means to attend had been given away without my knowledge? A knock at my door made me jump. "Eliza?" My mother's voice was hesitant. "Dinner is ready, honey." I quickly wiped away the tears I hadn't realized were falling. "I'll be down in a minute," I called, hoping my voice sounded normal. I carefully arranged the Stanford materials on my desk and took a deep breath, steeling myself. I wasn't going to let them see me break. Not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what had happened and what my options were. The dining room was quiet as I took my seat across from Jason, who had apparently been invited for the celebration dinner. He grinned at me, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "So, little sis, did you get into that fancy school of yours?" he asked, already helping himself to the lasagna our mother had prepared. My father cleared his throat. "She did. Stanford accepted her this morning." "No shit?" Jason looked genuinely surprised. "Well, congratulations, Brainiac. I guess all that studying paid off." "Language, Jason," our mother admonished gently, though her eyes never left my face. "We're very proud of you, sweetheart." I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thanks. I'm excited." I pushed my food around my plate, appetite gone. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk about finances tonight. The tuition deposit is due in 3 weeks." An uncomfortable silence descended on the table. My father and mother exchanged a look that confirmed everything I'd overheard. About that, my father began, setting down his fork. "There's something we need to discuss." Part of me wanted to scream, to confront them with what I knew, but another part, the part that had always been the rational, level-headed Eliza, wanted to hear what lie they'd constructed. "The college fund we set up for you has underperformed," my father continued carefully. "The market hasn't been kind the last few years, and the investments didn't grow as we'd hoped." Jason continued eating, seemingly uninterested in the conversation about my future. "How much is left?" I asked directly, my voice steadier than I felt. Another exchange of glances between my parents. "About 12,000, my mother finally admitted. I did the math quickly. "Barely enough for 1 semester." "I see," I said, setting down my fork. "And when did this market downturn happen?" My father shifted in his seat. "It's been gradual, but we took a significant hit about 3 months ago." 3 months. Right around the time Jason's truck had been upgraded and his company had suddenly hired 2 new employees. "That's funny," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them, "because I remember you telling Aunt Susan at Christmas that my college fund was doing great." "That was just 2 months ago." The table went silent. Even Jason stopped eating. "Eliza," my mother started. "I heard you," I interrupted, the dam finally breaking. "This afternoon, in Dad's study." "I heard everything." "The fund didn't underperform. You gave my college money to Jason for his business." My brother's head snapped up, eyes darting between me and our parents. The guilty look on his face told me he'd known exactly where his bailout money had come from. "Now, that's not entirely accurate," my father said, his tone hardening. "The money was always a family fund, not exclusively yours. We make decisions based on what's best for this family as a whole." "A family fund?" I repeated, incredulous. "That's not what you've been telling me my entire life." "It was the Matthews College Fund." "My college fund." "You promised me." "Watch your tone, young lady," my father warned, but I was beyond caring. "Did you know?" I turned to Jason, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Did you know where that money came from?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm he did. "Dad said it was a loan from the family savings," he muttered finally. "Oh, so now it's family savings, not my college fund?" I laughed bitterly. "That's convenient." "Eliza, please," my mother pleaded. "We didn't mean for this to happen." "But Jason's business was in trouble and I'm not." I shot back. "I just got into Stanford. Do you have any idea how hard that was? How many nights I stayed up studying while he was out partying? And now you're saying I can't go because you gave my money to him?" "You can still go to college," my father insisted. "Just maybe not Stanford. State has an excellent program." "I don't want to go to State." My voice broke as tears threatened again. "I worked for Stanford. I earned Stanford. And you knew how much it meant to me." Jason finally spoke up. "Look, Eliza, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would affect your college plans. Dad said he had it covered." I turned my glare to him. "And that's supposed to make it better? You've been burning through money since you started that business. New trucks, new equipment, fancy lunches with potential clients. And now I find out it was MY money you were spending. That's enough." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the plates jump. Jason is trying to build something. A real business. Something tangible. Not some academic fantasy. His words hit me like a physical blow. Academic fantasy? Is that what my dreams are to you? Robert, please, my mother whispered, but he was on a roll. Yes, you're smart, Eliza. We know that. But Jason has practical skills. He's creating jobs, providing a service. What are you going to do with a Stanford degree that you can't do with one from state? Come out with a mountain of debt and the same job prospects? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those years of encouragement, of praise for my academic achievements had been hollow. They'd never really valued my path. So this was always the plan? I asked quietly. Let me believe I had a future at a top school, then pull the rug out from under me when it actually happened? Of course not, my mother insisted. We did save for your education. But circumstances changed. Circumstances like Jason's inability to run a profitable business? I shot back. Or your inability to say no to him? Jason pushed his plate away. Hey, that's not fair. The landscaping business is seasonal. Everyone struggles in the winter. The loan from mom and dad is just to get through the slow months. It wasn't a loan from mom and dad, I snapped. It was MY College Fund. And let's be real, when exactly were you planning to pay it back? Before my tuition is due in 3 weeks. The guilty silence that followed was answer enough. I thought so, I said, standing up from the table. You know what the worst part is? It's not that you took the money. It's that you lied about it. You were going to let me believe some story about market downturns rather than admit what you did. We were trying to protect you, my father insisted. Protect me? From what? From knowing that my brother's failing business was more important to you than my education? From realizing that all those years of working my ass off for a dream you encouraged was just a waste of time? I shook my head in disgust. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourselves from having to admit what you did. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. Where do you think you're going? We're not finished discussing this. I faced them one last time. I am. I've heard enough. You've made your choices very clear. Back in my room, I locked the door and sank to the floor, letting the tears flow freely. My phone buzzed again, more friends checking on Stanford. I ignored it, too overwhelmed to respond. What was I supposed to tell them now? That I got in but couldn't go because my parents had decided my brother's struggling landscaping business was a better investment than my education? After a few minutes, I heard a soft knock. Eliza? It was my mother. Please, can we talk about this? There's nothing to talk about, I called back, not bothering to open the door. You and Dad made your decision 3 months ago. We can figure something out, she pleaded. Loans, scholarships, there are options. I almost laughed. Now they wanted to talk about options? After they'd gutted my college fund without even telling me? I'll figure it out myself, I replied. I always do. The sounds of her retreating footsteps left me alone with my thoughts. I pulled out my laptop and began researching frantically. Scholarships, grants, work-study programs, anything that might help close the enormous gap my parents had created. The numbers were daunting. Even with the maximum federal loans, I'd still be tens of thousands short each year. A text from my best friend, Mia, lit up my phone. Did you hear back yet? I'm dying to know. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Finally, I typed, I got in. But there's a problem with the money. Can I call you tomorrow? Her response was immediate. OMG, congrats. Money problem? What do you mean? Call me now. I hesitated, then hit dial. Mia had been my rock through high school. She deserved to know the truth. You got into Stanford, she shrieked when she answered. I knew you would. Wait, what's this about money? I thought your parents had a college fund for you. So did I replied and proceeded to tell her everything. That's messed up, she said when I finished. They can't just take your college money and give it to your brother. Can they? Apparently they can, I said bitterly. The account was in their names, not mine. Legally, it's their money to do with as they please. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. I've worked so hard for this, Mia. I can't just give up on Stanford. But I don't see how I can make it work without that money. What about your grandparents? Could they help? I'd considered that. Maybe. But that's a lot to ask, and they're on fixed incomes. My maternal grandparents were retired teachers, and my paternal grandfather had passed away years ago, leaving my grandmother with modest savings. Wait, Mia said suddenly. Isn't your 18th birthday next week? Yeah, why? So you're legally an adult. You could take out loans in your own name. I already checked. Federal loans won't cover enough, and I'd need a cosigner for private loans. And I knew my parents wouldn't cosign after tonight. This is so unfair, Mia fumed. They encouraged you all this time, knowing you were aiming for top schools, and then they just pulled the rug out from under you? Pretty much. We talked for another hour, brainstorming ideas, none of them particularly viable. By the time we hung up, it was past midnight, and I was mentally exhausted. A soft knock at my door startled me. I expected my mother again, but it was Jason's voice I heard. Eliza? Can we talk? I hesitated, then reluctantly opened the door. Jason stood in the hallway looking uncomfortable, hands shoved in his pockets. What do you want? I asked coolly. Can I come in? I stepped aside, allowing him into my room. He looked around awkwardly, taking in the Stanford material still spread across my desk. Look, I'm sorry, he began. I didn't know the money was supposed to be for your college. Don't lie to me, I cut him off. You knew exactly what that money was for. Everyone in this family has known about my college fund since I was in diapers. He had the grace to look ashamed. Okay, yes, I knew. But Dad told me the fund had performed better than expected, and there was enough for both your college and to help me out. And you believed that? Or did you just not care enough to question it? Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was desperate, Eliza. The business was about to go under. I had employees counting on me. I didn't know what else to do. So you took my future instead. The words came out flat and motionless. It wasn't like that, he insisted. Dad said it was a loan. I'm going to pay it back. When? I need it in 3 weeks for the deposit. He looked away. I can't get it all back that soon, but I promise I'll repay every cent. Great. So I'll have it in time for my kids to go to college, I said sarcastically. That really helps me now. I'm trying to make this right, Jason said, frustration creeping into his voice. What do you want me to do? My business is finally starting to stabilize. If I liquidate now, I'll lose everything and the money will be gone for good. I stared at him, this brother who had always had our parents' support no matter how many times he failed. You know what's crazy? If I had been the one to ask for $50,000 to start a business without a solid plan or any experience, they would have laughed. But you snap your fingers and they hand over my college fund without blinking. That's not fair, isn't it? How many chances have they given you, Jason? How many times have they bailed you out? The DUI in high school, the dropped classes in college they paid for anyway, the credit card debt they covered last year, and now this. Meanwhile, I've done everything right, and when it's finally my turn, there's nothing left for me. Jason seemed genuinely distressed. I didn't think of it that way. Of course you didn't. You never had to. He was quiet for a long moment. What if I could get you some of the money? Not all of it, but enough for the deposit. I looked at him skeptically. How? I've got some equipment I could sell. A few clients who owe me money I could push to pay early. It wouldn't be 50,000, but maybe 10? To start. I wanted to tell him it wasn't enough, that I needed all of it, but the reality of my situation was sinking in. 10,000 would at least let me secure my spot while I figured out the rest. You'd do that? I asked, suspicious of his sudden generosity. You're my sister, he said simply. And, you're right. I've had a lot of chances. You deserve yours too. It wasn't a solution to my overall problem, but it was something. A lifeline, however thin. Okay, I said finally. If you can get me something for the deposit, I'll figure out the rest somehow. Jason nodded, looking relieved to have some way to make amends. I'll start making calls tomorrow. And Eliza? I really am sorry. After he left, I sat on my bed, emotionally drained, but slightly less hopeless than before. Jason's offer wouldn't solve everything, but it was an acknowledgement, at least, that what had happened was wrong. I glanced at the Stanford materials again. I wasn't giving up. Not when I'd worked this hard. I'd find a way to make it happen, with or without my parents' support. The next morning, I woke early, having slept fitfully. The house was quiet, my father left for work at dawn, and my mother wasn't yet up. I showered and dressed, then headed to the kitchen to make coffee, determined to start tackling my new financial reality. To my surprise, my mother was already there, sitting at the kitchen island with papers spread before her. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Eliza," she said softly. "We need to talk." I poured myself coffee without responding, not ready for another round of excuses. "I've been up all night," she continued, looking at our finances. "What your father and I did, it was wrong. We betrayed your trust, and I'm so sorry." I remained silent, waiting to see where this was going. "I spoke with your father late last night, after everyone was in bed. We had a very long, very difficult conversation." She pushed a folder toward me. "He still thinks you should consider state, but I disagree. This is your dream, and we promise to help you achieve it." I opened the folder cautiously. Inside were documents for a home equity line of credit. "We can't replace all the money," my mother explained. "But we can get enough to cover your first year at Stanford. It would give you time to apply for more scholarships and grants for the remaining years." I stared at the papers, emotions warring within me. Relief at having a potential solution, anger that it had come to this, suspicion about why my mother had suddenly changed course. "What about Dad? He seemed pretty set on me going to state last night." My mother sighed. "Your father sometimes forgets that our children are individuals, not extensions of ourselves. He sees Jason struggling in a path similar to his own, and it resonates with him. But that doesn't mean your path is any less valid or important. So he's okay with this?" I gestured to the loan documents. "He will be," she said with quiet determination. "I made it clear that this isn't negotiable. We made a promise to you, and we need to honor it as best we can." I felt tears welling up again, but for a different reason this time. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me," she said, reaching for my hand. "This should never have happened in the first place. I should have stood up to your father when he first suggested using your fund for Jason's business. I failed you then, but I won't fail you again." The kitchen door swung open, and Jason appeared, looking tired but resolved. "Good, you're both here," he said. "I've been making calls since dawn. I've got a buyer for my extra mower and trimmer set, and 2 clients willing to prepay for spring services. Should be about $12,000 total." My mother looked surprised. "Jason, what are you talking about?" "I'm paying back what I can to Eliza's college fund," he explained. "It won't be the full amount yet, but it's a start." My mother's eyes filled with tears. That would make a big difference." Jason turned to me. "I meant what I said last night. This is on me, and I'm going to make it right." He hesitated, then added, "And I'm going to talk to Dad. He needs to understand that treating us differently isn't fair." For the first time since finding out about the betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. Between my mother's loan and Jason's repayment, I might actually be able to make Stanford work. The kitchen door opened again, and my father walked in, briefcase in hand. He stopped short when he saw the 3 of us gathered around the loan documents. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes narrowing at the papers. My mother stood up, her posture straight and determined. "We're fixing our mistake, Robert. All of us." My father's gaze moved from my mother to Jason to me, assessing the united front before him. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but something in our collective resolve seemed to reach him. "I see," he said quietly, setting down his briefcase. "And may I join this conversation?" My mother nodded, and my father took a seat at the island. For the next hour, we really talked, about what had happened, about fairness and promises, and the different forms success can take. It wasn't easy. There were tears and raised voices and moments where I thought we'd never find common ground. But by the time the morning sun filled the kitchen, we had a plan. My parents would take out the home equity loan. Jason would contribute what he could now and continue to repay the rest over time. I would apply for every scholarship and work-study program available, and yes, I would consider some less expensive options for graduate school down the line. It wasn't perfect. The trust that had been broken wouldn't be instantly repaired. My relationship with my father, in particular, would need time to heal. But as I looked at the Stanford acceptance letter that my mother had retrieved from my room and placed in the center of the island, I knew I would be going. My dream was still within reach. "I'm proud of you," my father said finally, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not just for getting into Stanford, but for standing up for yourself yesterday. You showed more backbone than I gave you credit for." Coming from him, it was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. I nodded, accepting it for what it was. "I think I've underestimated you," he continued. "Maybe I've been seeing you as my little girl for too long, not the capable young woman you've become." Maybe I agreed. "But Dad, I'm still going to need your support, not just financially. This is going to be hard, and I can't do it if I'm always fighting against you." He nodded solemnly. "You have it. I may not always understand your choices, but I do want you to succeed on your terms, not mine." As we finished our discussion and began to disperse, my father to work, my mother to finalize the loan application, Jason to sell his equipment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The last 24 hours had been a roller coaster of emotions, from the elation of acceptance to the devastation of betrayal to this tentative new understanding. Stanford was still months away. There would be more hurdles to overcome, more difficult conversations, more compromises to make. But as I returned to my room to finally respond to all the congratulatory messages waiting on my phone, I knew I would get there. Not because my path had been smoothly paved by others, but because when the pavement cracked and fell away, I'd found the strength to forge ahead anyway. And in a strange way, that knowledge was its own kind of victory.